Hey guys, tonight we drift into the clouds. Not the kind floating lazily above your city, but the ones that wrap themselves around the steep, green walls of northern Peru. You walk along a mountain path where every step feels borrowed from gravity, the mist curling around your ankles like a living thing. Down below, the forest hums with insects, and up above, the sky disappears into endless white. Somewhere in this in-between world, the Chachapoya, the so-called warriors of the clouds, carved out a life on cliffs where most of us would have lost our lunch just looking down. Honestly, if you're afraid of heights, you probably wouldn't survive 10 minutes here. And that's before the locals ask you to join them on a rope bridge made of grass. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing where these late-night journeys find you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step deeper into the forest, the air cool and wet, and you can almost hear the whispers of a civilization hidden in the mist. The Chachapoya weren't the kind of people who picked easy spots for their villages. They lived high in the Andes, sometimes so high you feel like you're breathing through a straw. Their stone settlements cling to mountain ridges, their tombs perch on cliff ledges, and their fortresses rise like green-covered crowns above valleys. Imagine being a delivery guy here. One wrong step, and you'd be filing your complaint with gravity's customer service desk. One widely accepted fact is that the Chachapoya's homeland stretched across Peru's cloud forests, roughly between the Marañón River and the eastern slopes of the Andes. Their world was defined by mist, steep cliffs, and forests so dense that sunlight sometimes gave up trying to break through. They weren't the largest empire in South America, but their territory was rugged, dramatic, and nearly impossible to invade, which, of course, didn't stop bigger powers from trying. As you pause on a mossy ridge, you hear the soft rush of distant waterfalls. It's a soundscape that would have been as familiar to a Chachapoya child as the hum of traffic is to someone growing up today. Life here was shaped by altitude and rain. Fields had to be carved into slopes, food coaxed from thin soil, and houses built of stone and thatch that could withstand the constant damp. It's no wonder they earned a reputation for being resilient. You'd have to be if your backyard was basically a vertical drop. And yet, this resilience came with a kind of poetry. Their architecture blended into the hillsides, as if the mountains themselves had grown walls and doorways. Villages often had round houses built from stone, clustered together like mushrooms sprouting after rain. Step inside one of those circles, and you'd probably find a family huddled near a fire, sharing maize beer, their laughter rising up into the mist. You, meanwhile, would be trying not to knock over the walls with your oversized tourist backpack. There's a quirky tidbit whispered among some locals even today, that the Chachapoya were unusually fair-skinned compared to their neighbors, with lighter hair sometimes appearing in descriptions by early Spanish chroniclers. Some have spun this into wild theories of European contact long before Columbus, while others argue it was simply genetic variation within South America. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect truth, exaggeration, or just the Spaniards' tendency to see difference where none really existed. Either way, The image of ghostly warriors in the clouds adds a little extra mystery to the fog that always seems to veil their lands. The trail bends, and suddenly the forest parts to reveal a precipice dropping into nothingness. The view is both terrifying and breathtaking, like standing on the edge of the world. Somewhere far below, rivers snake like silver threads through the green. Up here, though, you feel the presence of the people who once thrived in this air, their fortresses rising on cliffs, their sarcophagi staring down from ledges, their legends carried on the mist. A lizard darts across your path, and you laugh softly at how fast it disappears into the underbrush. It's almost as if even the animals here have inherited the Chachapoya knack for vanishing when outsiders appear. You keep walking, your steps cushioned by damp earth, your mind drifting between the clouds and the people who lived inside them. Somewhere ahead, the story deepens into battles, beliefs, and mysteries. But for now, you're just standing in the doorway of their world, about to enter. You keep walking along the misty ridge until the trail opens onto a clearing dotted with low stone walls. Here, you glimpse how daily life once unfolded in these impossible heights. Round houses rise like stone beehives, their walls built from stacked rock, their thatched roofs long since gone, but their footprints still pressed into the mountain. You step into one, and the circle feels cozy, though maybe a little cramped. The kind of place where you'd constantly bang your head on the ceiling if you were tall enough. Families lived here close together, sharing heat and stories, the cloud forest pressing in at every edge. The Chachapoya weren't city dwellers in the sense of sprawling grids like the Inca at Cusco. Instead, their settlements clung to ridges and plateaus, always in conversation with the mountains themselves. Archaeologists have counted hundreds of such villages across the cloud forest, often placed where you can see for miles down the valleys. One accepted fact is that these elevated homes weren't just practical for farming terraces. They doubled as lookouts, perfect for spotting trouble long before it arrived. You can almost imagine a child running to the edge, pointing out a distant figure moving across the valley floor, then sprinting back with breathless news. Strangers are coming! Life here was hard, but it had its rewards. The soil, though thin, grew potatoes, maize, and quinoa, crops that could handle the altitude. Families kept llamas and guinea pigs, not quite the fluffy pets you're picturing, but vital sources of meat and fur. And yes, there's a quirky tidbit here. Guinea pigs often lived inside the houses with the families, scurrying around the hearth like squeaky roommates. It's not exactly the cleanest arrangement, but hey, no need for a doorbell when the dinner squeaks back. From the outside, this mountain life might look isolating, but the Chachapoya weren't cut off. They traded with neighbors, carrying goods down into lowland jungles and up across Andean passes. Picture yourself on a narrow trail with a woven basket strapped to your back, the mist soaking through your clothes, and every step taking you past orchids blooming from sheer rock walls. The goods inside might be feathers from tropical birds, salt from distant valleys, or woven cloth prized by highland traders. You'd huff and puff like someone carrying grocery bags up 6 flights of stairs. Only your stairs happen to be a mountain. One detail worth pausing on. The Chachapoya developed a knack for building terraces into the slopes, creating little steps of farmland that clung to impossible inclines. These terraces held soil in place, kept water from rushing away, and allowed maize to grow in a region otherwise dominated by cliffs. Historians still argue whether their methods were borrowed from neighbors like the Inca or developed independently. Either way, standing here, you can sense the careful labor behind each carved-out plot. You stroll past more house circles, their mossy stones silent now, but alive once with laughter, songs, and the crackle of fires. You imagine the smell of maize beer brewing, smoke curling lazily into the fog, children chasing each other dangerously close to the cliff's edge, something parents in every age would shout about. A parrot screeches overhead, a reminder that while this was the high Andes, the tropics were never far away. From a neutral voice, we can note that chroniclers described the Chachapoya as hardy, mountain-trained people, known for both their toughness and their artistry. Spanish accounts, written after conquest, so always with bias, remarked on their skill in weaving and building. Their round stone houses with decorative zigzag friezes hinted at a people who, even in constant fog, loved patterns and design. You can almost run your hand along one of those walls now, the grooves slick with moss, but the design still bold beneath centuries of weather. Of course, living this high came with hazards beyond gravity. Landslides could tear down entire sections of farmland, and earthquakes sometimes rattled stones loose. You picture yourself sleeping peacefully in one of those circular homes, only to feel the ground shiver beneath you, pots clattering to the floor. Not exactly the restful night you hoped for, but resilience was the Chachapoya's way. Rebuild, replant, rehang the guinea pig hammock if necessary. The mist thickens again, and for a moment the village seems to disappear. You blink, and it's as if the clouds themselves have swallowed the people who once lived here. It leaves you wondering, how did they carry water up these slopes? Did children complain about the steep walk to school? Did elders ever dream of flat land? Or was the cliffside simply home in the truest sense? A sudden gust of wind makes your poncho flap dramatically, and you laugh at how much like a movie hero you feel until you trip on a loose stone. The Chachapoya may have been warriors, but they probably had their share of clumsy moments too. Life above the world continues on this ridge, and as you walk, the stones give way to something larger on the horizon. Walls rising like the bones of a giant fortress, waiting in the mist. You walk toward the looming outline in the mist until the trees part, and there it is, Cuelap. The fortress rises like a stone ship marooned on a mountain, its walls 30 feet high and nearly 2 miles around, wrapped in moss and orchids that hang like nature's jewelry. You tilt your head back, the ramparts disappearing into fog above you, and you realize this wasn't just a settlement. It was a statement. The Chachapoya carved their resilience into the skyline, daring anyone to challenge them. The climb to Cuelap isn't gentle. You follow a narrow passage that funnels upward between massive stone walls. It's so tight in places that only one person can pass at a time, a design that once forced attackers into single-file vulnerability. You imagine yourself as an invading warrior, sword raised, only to discover your entire army is stuck in the Andean version of a checkout line. It's the kind of defensive genius that makes you respect the architects and laugh a little at the poor guy in the back who forgot to bring snacks for the siege. One accepted fact is that Cuelap was built around the 6th century CE, long before the Inca ever appeared on the horizon. Archaeologists believe it housed up to 3,000 people and contained hundreds of circular dwellings, storage rooms, temples, and open plazas. As you wander its terraces, the fortress feels less like a single building and more like a mountain reshaped into a city. Every stone seems to hum with the weight of centuries, even though lichens now cover their surfaces. You step through one of the narrow entrances and into the inner sanctum. The fog lifts just enough to reveal rows of round stone houses, their walls broken but still defiantly standing. Carved friezes of zigzags and diamond shapes run along some of the stones, decorations that weren't necessary for defense but spoke of pride and artistry. You trace the grooves with your fingertips, and for a moment, it feels like a handshake across time. A quirky tidbit lies in the fortress's reputation as the Machu Picchu of the North. Tourists today use that nickname, but archaeologists often sigh and roll their eyes. Quilap is older, larger in scale, and arguably more impressive in sheer defensive design. Yet Machu Picchu gets the postcards, while Quilap gets the, "Oh, I've never heard of that one." If ancient ruins could sulk, Quilap would probably be glaring jealously at its southern cousin. You wander into what once may have been ceremonial spaces. Some archaeologists believe the open plazas hosted rituals tied to the mountains and the sky. Picture the scene. A priest raising his arms into the mist, voices chanting, the fog itself swirling like smoke in response. Historians still argue whether Quilap was primarily a military fortress, a ceremonial center, or both. Standing here, you realize it could have been all of these things. Defense, worship, and home woven into one stony embrace. Climbing higher, you find vantage points where the view drops away into dizzying valleys. The Marañón River twists below like a silver serpent. Clouds roll in and out so quickly, you half expect to see phantom armies marching across the slopes, only to vanish seconds later. The Chachapoya earned their name as Cloud People, not just because of geography, but because living here felt like straddling two worlds. Earth below, sky above, mist always in between. Neutral narration slips in. Spanish chroniclers were astonished when they encountered Quilap in the 16th century. They described it as a great fortress, formidable and mysterious, rivaling anything in Europe. But after the conquest, it fell into disuse, reclaimed by forest and forgotten by the wider world, until modern explorers stumbled across it again centuries later. Today, it remains one of South America's most dramatic archaeological sites, though less visited than Inca ruins. You sit on a stone, imagining the bustle of life when Quilap was alive. Children darting between houses, women grinding maize on stone slabs, warriors sharpening spears near the gates. You hear the laughter, the crackle of fire, the low hum of voices as night fog rolls in. For a moment, the fortress isn't a ruin, but a living city, its heartbeat hidden in the mist. A butterfly flits by, landing on the lichen-covered wall, and you chuckle. Even here, where warriors once guarded mountain passes, nature insists on adding delicate flourishes. Then again, maybe that's the real strength of Quilap. It endures not by resisting nature, but by becoming part of it. You rise and walk deeper into the fortress, the mist shifting around you like curtains. Somewhere ahead, the story turns darker, away from homes and fortresses, toward tombs carved into sheer cliffs, where the dead still keep watch over the valleys below. You follow a narrow goat path away from the fortress until the walls fall behind and the mountain leans out into emptiness. The trail hugs the cliff so closely you can press your palm to the rock and feel its damp chill. And then, like faces appearing in a dream, the guardians come into view. High on a sheer wall stand a row of human-shaped figures, shoulders squared, chins lifted, painted in faded reds and creams. They aren't merely containers for the departed. They look like clay and stone sentinels, watching valleys and clouds from ledges so thin you wonder how even birds land there. You stand beneath them, a speck at the base of the precipice, and try to imagine the effort. Every funerary bundle, every ornament, every handful of clay had to be hauled up pathways of air to those shelves. The placement feels deliberate, tombs leaning out where the mountain falls away, as if the departed are poised between this world and the next. From up there, a soul could step into the sky the way you step across a puddle. You fight the urge to wave. Friendly, sure, but probably not great funeral etiquette. Take a quiet moment while a neutral voice slips in. Archaeologists call these anthropomorphic coffins purinmacus, and the best-known examples perch at Carajilla in Peru's Utcubamba Valley. They were built over inner frames of cane and sticks, then packed with clay and stones, plastered smooth and painted with ochre bands and geometric signs. Another widely accepted fact: the Chachapoya also built cliffside mausoleums, like those at Rivash, tiny house facades with painted walls and symbolic window shapes. So the dead dwell in miniature neighborhoods carved straight into the rock. The combination of purinmacus and house tombs gives this landscape a double language: guardians that look outward and dwellings that look inward. You edge along a safer spur trail to a viewpoint. Up close, the figures at Carajilla are tall, some over 2 meters, with stylized heads and long noses, broad shoulders tapering into rigid torsos. A few bear skulls set like crowns on their roofs, not for shock, but as ancestry, tokens of lineage and guardianship. Paint has flaked, yet red diamonds and zigzags still whisper of status and belief. When a gust of wind funnels through the canyon, the figures seem to lean forward, as if straining to hear your thoughts. You promise to think respectful thoughts. The ledge is so narrow that even a whisper feels like a climbing rope. You hold it carefully. What did the living do here? You picture a mourning procession inching along the cliff, rope lines taut, murmured petitions to the mountain carried on the damp air. Music drifts up, low flutes, a drum like a heartbeat, while a ritual specialist touches the tomb with new pigment. The air smells of wet lichen and resin. No one shouts. Even now, your voice instinctively softens, as though loud talk might unsettle the rock. In the Andean world, ancestors are not gone. They remain participants. Families visit to leave food and woven offerings, to ask for guidance, to fold the present gently into the past. If the path feels vertiginous to you, imagine doing it while carrying both grief and responsibility. You'd skip leg day in the gym forever after this. You move later along the valley to Rivash, where the tombs resemble a miniature village splashed in red and cream, perched on shelves of stone just wide enough for a careful foot. The little facades are sealed now, their walls once brightened by pigments made from clays and plants. Animal forms, crosses, ladders, symbols that may have shifted meanings across centuries, decorate smooth panels. If Carajilla's purinmachos are sentinels, Revache is a quiet street where no one opens the shutters. You smile at the scale. Here the departed seem to rest in better cliffside real estate than most vacation rentals. No, you won't check the nightly rate. Another neutral aside. Early Spanish chroniclers described how highland peoples, including the Chachapoya, kept mummified ancestors in seated bundles and sometimes brought them out during festivals to honor, consult, and celebrate them before returning them to repose. This wasn't macabre. It was familial. After the upheavals of conquest and missionary campaigns, many mummies were removed, reburied, or destroyed, which is why intact finds today are rare, and why archaeologists work slowly, balancing analysis with community wishes. A mainstream point of agreement is simple. Chachapoya funerary practice favored cliffs, caves, and ledges, situating the dead within landscapes that feel halfway to the sky. You squat to study the slope beneath a collapsed niche, flakes of red paint, a sliver of miniature beam hardened by time, a fingertip of plaster still glossy in the dew. You imagine craftspeople mixing ochre, laying designs, tracing zigzags and diamonds that might represent water, serpents, pathways, or protective patterns. The exact meanings remain elusive, but repetition suggests a language of forms. In your head, you translate it as hold, watch, remember. You don't know if that's correct. You only know it feels right. There's a quirky tidbit locals sometimes share. When winds comb the canyon just so, the Purinmachos whistle, as if the cliff itself takes a breath. The sensible explanation is aerodynamics, gaps, cavities, wind. But on a day like this, with clouds creeping like white cats along the cornices, superstition fits like a well-worn poncho. Another curiosity floats around guide chatter. Claims that certain tomb ledges align with sunrise at solstices. The evidence is thin, the ledges inconvenient for instruments, and measurements inconsistent. Still, the idea persists because the gaze of these guardians seems set on horizon and cycle. Historians still argue whether the cliff placements were primarily defensive, protecting tombs from raiders, or cosmological, staging the ancestors as mediators between earth and sky. Practical questions tug at you too. How were bodies carried here? Likely with temporary scaffolds and rope teams trained for cliff work. Were ceremonies timed to dry seasons? Probably. Wet stone and processions do not mix. Did storms ever take a tomb? Almost certainly. Mountains deal in both beauty and risk. Did communities return to repair them? Layered pigments and patched plaster say yes. The ledges become ledgers of devotion, each new coat a note in the margin. And then a harder thought. When the Inca expanded into these cloud forests, did they fold Chachapoya practices into imperial frameworks, tolerate them alongside state rituals, or try to redirect them toward their own sun-centered doctrine? Historians still argue whether imperial policy here was mostly accommodation or reorganization, and you can feel that uncertainty in the way the paint fades at different rates, as if time itself negotiated terms. A condor shadow skims the far wall, too distant to hear the wing beat, yet close enough to ripple across your skin like cool water. It seems right that the great bird of the high Andes loops this place, a messenger flying the corridor between peaks, the way memory travels between generations. Somewhere a waterfall hushes the valley, somewhere a bromeliad clings to a crack, blooming where no flower should. The mountain keeps its own calendar, turning pages of moss and mist. You rest against a steady boulder while a tiny lizard pops its head out, surveys your shoelaces, and retreats. Proof that even the smallest locals prefer ledge life. You exhale a careful laugh and decide that if you lived here, your cardio would be exceptional and your shoelace knots legendary. A final grin tugs at you. When you book a room with a view, make sure it doesn't involve rope ladders and a politely staring audience of stone faces. Before you go, you trace the cliff with your eyes one last time. The guardians neither blink nor bow. They simply endure, their paint fading, their message persistent. Honor holds better than mortar. You turn back toward the path, boots whispering against grit, and the valley widens, making space for what comes next. Beliefs and offerings, the murmured rituals that travel through mist like the softest of bells. You descend a twisting path from the cliffs, the guardians shrinking behind you until they're just pale dots against the rock. The forest swallows sound, but then another layer rises. The distant rhythm of drums, the high keening of flutes. You push through a stand of ferns and stumble into a clearing where warriors once trained, their movements sharp and deliberate even in your imagination. Spears glint, shields lock, and voices echo commands in a tongue that seems woven from the very mist. These are the Chachapoya in their feared role. Fighters balanced between mountain and cloud. You pause and picture the scene. Warriors stand lean and quick, trained to move over slopes like goats with better fashion sense. Their hair tied back, their shields painted with patterns of zigzags and sunbursts. They are not a horde, but a watchful band. Outsiders called them warriors of the clouds for a reason. The terrain was their ally, their ambush partner, their permanent high ground. Imagine yourself as an enemy soldier. One moment you march confidently through a narrow valley, the next you hear whistles from above. And then stones rain down, spears dart from the mist, and shadows vanish before you can strike back. If this were a video game, you'd be hitting respawn a lot. A widely accepted fact. When the Inca expanded into northern Peru in the late 15th century, they met some of their fiercest resistance from the Chachapoya. Chroniclers wrote of long campaigns, brutal mountain fighting, and ambushes that wore down imperial troops. The Inca eventually claimed victory, but only after repeated efforts and heavy losses. Even once conquered, the Chachapoya never fully bent the knee. Uprisings flared again and again, their cloud forest terrain always tilting the odds. Step closer to the training ground in your mind. A captain barks orders, while young warriors practice forming tight defensive lines. Shields interlock, spears thrust in rhythm, and the sound of wooden practice weapons slapping shields fills the air. You can almost smell sweat mixing with damp moss. Some say the Chachapoya also favored surprise. Lightning strikes on supply lines, sudden retreats into fog. Historians still argue whether they fought as disciplined units or as fluid guerrilla bands. But either way, they earned a reputation that even the Inca both feared and respected. You watch as a group breaks off into mock combat. Two warriors circle each other, jabbing with short spears, then one lunges forward, using momentum from the slope to push his rival back. The crowd cheers, and you notice something clever. The fighters keep shifting position to avoid being backlit by the mist, never giving away their outline. Even their practice carries the habits of war. You think about your own awkward gym routine and decide maybe you'd just volunteer as the camp cook. A quirky tidbit floats through the fog. Some locals whisper that the Chachapoya trained giant eagles to assist in battle. The story is most likely legend, but the image of warriors releasing trained birds into a chaotic skirmish is undeniably cinematic. Whether true or not, it speaks to the aura that clung to these mountain fighters, half human, half myth, always shrouded in mist. The neutral voice returns briefly. Archaeological finds confirm the use of spears, clubs, and shields, but no definitive eagle cores. What is clear is that their strength lay in terrain knowledge and ambush tactics. Outsiders never felt safe in cloud country. The forest itself seemed to grow eyes and whisper warnings. A sudden gust shakes the canopy above, sending a drizzle of water from leaves onto your shoulders. For a second, it feels like the forest itself applauds, as though the ghosts of warriors approve your presence. You grin nervously and whisper back, "Thanks, but I'll skip the spear practice." The clearing fades as you walk, but the sense of readiness lingers. Everywhere you look, the land itself seems to sharpen into a weapon, cliffs as shields, fog as camouflage, rivers as barriers. You realize that in the Chachapoya world, battle wasn't just between people. It was people and mountains together against the invader. And as you follow the trail, the drums recede, replaced by softer sounds, chatter, trade, laughter. Beyond warfare, life demanded alliances and rivalries with neighbors, weaving politics as tightly as shields in formation. You leave the training ground behind, the echoes of drums fading into the forest, and soon the sounds shift. Not war cries, but the soft rhythm of barter. Picture yourself stepping into a market square perched precariously on a ridge. Round stone houses line the edges, and woven mats spread across the ground. Display feathers from the Amazon, salt cakes from mountain springs, bright fabrics dyed with crushed plants, and clay pots patterned with zigzags. The air smells of roasted maize and smoky fires. Here, survival means not only fighting, but also trading, and occasionally haggling like your next meal depends on it, because, well, it probably does. The Chachapoya were not an isolated people. One accepted fact is that they built networks of exchange that connected cloud forests to lowland jungle and highland plains. Through these trails moved goods as exotic as parrot feathers, coca leaves, and jungle fruits, along with staples like salt, potatoes, and maize. You pick up a bright green feather and imagine the days it traveled, carried by traders who braved rivers and mountains. Maybe you trade it for salt, because let's face it, popcorn without salt is a tragedy no civilization should endure. Trade, however, wasn't always peaceful. Neighboring groups sometimes treated Chachapoya valleys as convenient highways or fertile prizes, and disputes erupted. You can almost hear a shouted argument over a stack of maize baskets, voices rising, hands gesturing sharply. In a moment, it's no longer a market but a battleground of words, which could spiral into the clang of weapons if insults cut too deep. Historians still argue whether the Chachapoya formed a unified state or lived as loosely allied communities that sometimes cooperated, sometimes fought. Either way, alliances and rivalries braided through daily life like vines across a wall. You stroll through the imaginary market, noting details. A woman pours maize beer into a clay cup, laughter spilling with the froth. A young boy chases a llama that's stolen a pouch of coca leaves. Two elders haggle over pottery with the same energy as kids trading baseball cards. It's lively, communal, and just a little chaotic. Proof that even in the clouds, human nature runs on the same settings. Neutral voice steps in. Archaeological finds of exotic goods confirm these trade networks, while Inca chroniclers noted the Chachapoya's reputation as skilled weavers, whose textiles were prized far beyond their valleys. The artistry of their cloth may have been as much a diplomatic tool as their spears. A well-woven gift could smooth an alliance, or at least stall a feud until the next feast. A quirky tidbit comes from oral traditions that say some Chachapoya villages held contests to outdo each other's feasts, roasting whole herds of guinea pigs or brewing barrels of maize beer to impress allies and intimidate rivals. Picture the aftermath. Everyone full, everyone tipsy, and a few poor souls vowing never to look at maize beer again. Still, you can't help but smile. Political strategy delivered with a hangover. The market hums louder in your imagination until it seems the whole valley vibrates with life. Yet beneath the bustle is tension, the awareness that alliances could snap like woven rope. That's the paradox of living in the clouds. Close communities depending on each other, yet cliffs never far away to remind you how thin the ground is beneath your feet. You pick up a clay pot etched with a diamond motif, admire the steady hand that carved it, then carefully set it back. The potter nods at you, though whether in thanks or suspicion is unclear. You back away slowly, making a mental note not to touch ancient merchandise unless you plan to buy. From the edge of the ridge, the market noise drifts into mist, replaced by softer sounds. Chants, flutes, the murmur of prayer. The path turns from trade to belief, leading into the heart of rituals where mountains breathe, ancestors listen, and the sky itself feels like a temple ceiling. The path leads you away from the noisy market and into a quieter grove where mist hangs thicker, almost like a curtain closing around you. The chatter of trade vanishes, replaced by the soft echo of flutes and the steady rhythm of drums. You step into a clearing ringed by stones, and suddenly the air feels heavier. Not threatening, but reverent. Here, the Chachapoya's world of alliances and war gives way to something deeper. Ritual, belief, the invisible threads tying human lives to mountain spirits and the restless clouds above. A circle of figures kneels around a fire. Their cloaks ripple in the damp air, their faces painted in ochre and white. The flames flicker against carved staffs planted upright in the soil. One accepted fact: the Chachapoya practiced ancestor veneration, much like many Andean cultures. The dead weren't gone. They lingered as guardians, advisors, silent partners in every decision. You imagine families carrying mummified bundles of ancestors out for ceremonies, setting them beside the fire so the living and the departed could share one more evening together. The belief wasn't morbid. It was comforting, like inviting your grandparents to dinner, just with fewer complaints about portion sizes. You sit quietly as chants rise into the mist. Words blur, but the cadence rolls like a mountain stream. The ritual specialist raises hands, scattering coca leaves into the fire. They curl, blacken, and vanish into smoke, carrying prayers upward. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies leaned more toward worship of mountain spirits, ancestor communion, or fertility rituals tied to crops. Standing here, surrounded by mist so thick it feels alive, you realize it could have been all of these. Belief was never neatly compartmentalized. Your eyes drift to the offerings laid out: small clay pots of maize, a bundle of feathers, a llama figurine carved from stone. Symbolic gifts, each carrying a whisper of meaning. A young boy places a guinea pig near the altar, and you almost chuckle. It scampers nervously, then sits as though it knows this is a solemn moment. A quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest guinea pigs were not only food, but also used ritually, their squeaks believed to reveal omens about health or fortune. Imagine visiting a fortune teller who hands you a guinea pig and says, "If it sneezes twice, you'll ace your exam." Not the most predictable system, but hey, it kept people on their toes. The neutral voice of history steps in briefly. Archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial plazas at sites like Cuelap and elsewhere in Chachapoya territory, with evidence of offerings and fire pits. Some shrines were aligned with surrounding peaks, suggesting rituals were timed with solstices or agricultural cycles. The mist itself may have been viewed as sacred, a living veil that connected this world with whatever lay beyond. You listen as the drumbeat slows, heart-like, steady, and deep. A woman sprinkles maize beer on the ground, murmuring thanks to the earth. Another casts coca leaves into the air, watching where they fall. The crowd hums softly, a collective exhale into the fog. You tilt your head back and see only white, no sky, no stars, just the sense of being wrapped in a vast, breathing cloak. And then, a moment of humor breaks through. One of the cloaks slips from a man's shoulders, landing in the damp mud. He sighs, picks it up, shakes it, and mutters something that makes his neighbor stifle a laugh. Even in sacred moments, people still deal with wardrobe malfunctions. It's oddly reassuring. Ceremony doesn't erase humanity. It simply frames it in rhythm and smoke. The fire pops, sending a spark into the mist. For a heartbeat, it looks like a star trying to shine in the fog. You realize the ceremony is not about grand spectacles, but about continuity. Breath, food, smoke, and song repeating across generations until they become as much a part of the mountains as moss and stone. You rise quietly, stepping back from the circle. The chants fade as you follow the trail deeper into the clouds. Ahead, louder voices rise, not chants this time, but shouts, commands, the clash of empires colliding. The mist begins to shiver with tension, and you sense the arrival of an empire too vast to ignore. The Inca. The mist thickens again, but this time it feels charged, as though the forest itself is holding its breath. You walk along a ridge, hear distant horns, and then voices. Louder, sharper, not the chants of ritual, but the bark of orders. The path bends, and there they are. Figures descending in formation, armor gleaming, standards fluttering even in the damp air. The Inca have arrived. Imagine standing on this ridge centuries ago, watching column after column wind through the valleys. They carry bronze-headed spears, slings, and banners stitched with the golden sun of Inti. Compared to the smaller Chachapoya bands, the Inca look endless, like a river of warriors pouring through the mountains. One accepted fact. By the late 15th century, the Inca under Tupac Inca Yupanqui pushed into Chachapoya lands, intent on folding the cloud forests into their empire. Their road system, stretching thousands of miles, meant troops could flow across the Andes like blood through veins. And when they came here, they expected obedience. But you know the Chachapoya aren't the obedient kind. You hear the whistle of signals from the cliffs, faint at first, then echoing in patterns. Shadows flicker in the fog above, and suddenly stones crash down onto the Inca column. Chaos ripples through the ranks. You smile nervously. It's textbook Chachapoya. Fight from the mist, vanish into the ridges, let the terrain do half the work. If you were keeping score, it'd be Chachapoya 1, Inca 0. The Inca, of course, weren't amateurs. They regroup quickly, shields locked, slingers scanning the cliffs. Orders ripple through, and you realize how different their style is. Disciplined, coordinated, like a living machine. The Chachapoya, by contrast, melt in and out of visibility, skirmishing and retreating, refusing a straight fight. It's like watching chess played with fog and stone. Historians still argue whether the Chachapoya were ever truly conquered or simply coerced into a reluctant alliance after years of grinding battles. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Resistance, then uneasy submission. From a neutral narrator's perspective, chroniclers such as Cieza de Leon recorded that the Inca campaign in Chachapoya territory was among the hardest of their northern conquests. Even after formal annexation, uprisings persisted. Some Chachapoya were forcibly resettled across the empire to weaken local resistance, a common Inca tactic. Yet the reputation of the Cloud Warriors lingered even as they were absorbed into imperial ranks. Back in your second-person shoes, you picture the tension in a Chachapoya village as news spreads. The Inca demand submission. Messengers carry tokens of alliance or ultimatum, and families whisper in firelight, fight, yield, or negotiate. Some leaders see opportunity. The Inca bring roads, goods, security. Others see only chains. You can almost hear the debates, heated as maize beer at midnight, with younger warriors eager for battle and elders wary of annihilation. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some legends say the Inca admired Chachapoya women so much that many were chosen as wives and concubines within Cusco's nobility. Spanish chroniclers, ever fond of scandal, exaggerated this into tales of beauty contests and sweeping abductions. Whether myth or truth, it highlights how cultural absorption wasn't just military. It was personal, familial, tangled in relationships that blurred the line between conqueror and conquered. In the clearing, you watch as two figures approach. An Inca envoy clad in rich textiles, and a Chachapoya elder leaning on a staff. They meet in silence, mist curling between them. A small llama figurine is offered, then a bundle of coca leaves. Alliance? Tribute? Or simply stalling for time? You realize diplomacy here was just as delicate as ambushes. A wrong word could send villages to ruin. A clever gesture could buy another season of independence. And yet, tension thickens. The Inca do not vanish easily. They dig roads into mountains, build garrisons on ridges, post soldiers in valleys. Every Chachapoya choice narrows, until even resistance is woven into empire. Still, the image lingers. Warriors perched in mist, refusing to surrender quietly. The horns sound again, deep and rolling, and you feel the shift from ritual to campaign. The Cloud people have met the Empire of the Sun, and though history records conquest, the story in the mist is more complicated. Defiance carved into fog, resistance echoing long after armies move on. You walk away from the clash, heart pounding with the imagined chaos of it all. Ahead, the trail leads into darker groves, where voices whisper of uprisings, escapes, and fighters who refuse to let conquest be the final word. You step off the ridge and follow a path down into thicker forest, where the air feels charged with secrets. The Inca banners are gone, but the story doesn't quiet down. It shifts into whispers of defiance. Here, resistance doesn't roar, it breathes through the mist. You hear faint bird calls, then sudden silence, as though the jungle itself has learned to hush when warriors move through it. The Chachapoya didn't surrender easily, even after Inca garrisons dotted their valleys. One accepted fact: uprisings broke out repeatedly, with villages vanishing into forests to regroup and strike. Chroniclers complained of constant rebellion, describing how the people of the clouds slipped away only to return like smoke curling back through cracks. Imagine being an Inca guard stationed on a lonely ridge, hearing laughter from the trees. Then nothing. You'd probably sleep with one eye open. Not that it would help much. You follow a faint trail cut into the slope. The moss muffles your steps, and for a moment, you feel like one of those warriors. Shadows shift between trees. You crouch low, listening. A twig snaps, and suddenly you realize you're surrounded. But instead of attack, it's a glimpse. Lean figures with painted faces, gripping spears, watching silently. Then, just as quickly, they vanish. This is how resistance worked here. Not pitched battles, but flashes, warnings, ambushes that melted back into mist. You let out a nervous laugh. If it were a movie, you'd be the comic relief character eliminated in the first 5 minutes. Neutral narration reminds you. The Inca responded with harsh tactics, relocating Chachapoya communities to distant provinces of the empire. Families were uprooted, scattered like seeds across unfamiliar lands, a strategy designed to break rebellion. Yet even displaced, Chachapoya fighters were often conscripted into Inca armies, gaining a reputation as skilled warriors used in distant campaigns. Ironically, the empire that fought so hard to subdue them soon relied on their strength in battles elsewhere. Historians still argue whether this shows assimilation or simply imperial pragmatism. A quirky tidbit comes from oral traditions that whisper of hidden valleys where rebels lived on for decades, evading both Inca patrols and later Spanish chroniclers. These stories claim some villages became ghost towns, abandoned in plain sight, so that outsiders would find only empty houses, while the real community lived unseen deeper in the forest. It's the Andean version of hitting stealth mode and never turning it off. You pass a waterfall spilling down a cliff, its roar masking every sound. It's easy to see how fighters could hide nearby, watching unseen. You take a sip from the spray, cold and sharp, and think about the patience required to live in constant readiness, planting crops one day, planning ambushes the next. Resistance wasn't a single battle. It was a way of life woven into the landscape. Somewhere in the canopy, a monkey chatters, then goes quiet again. You grin at the thought. Even wildlife might have played accidental roles as lookouts or alarm bells. Imagine a startled monkey shrieking at the wrong moment and giving away a whole ambush. Even the bravest warriors had to gamble on the cooperation of their noisy neighbors. The path leads you to a small clearing where the remains of terraces climb the slope. Crops once grew here, even under pressure, proof that rebellion wasn't just about fighting, but also about survival. You picture families working silently, planting potatoes and maize with quick, efficient movements, always ready to scatter if scouts spotted approaching soldiers. For them, resistance meant more than spears. It meant endurance, keeping culture alive under the empire's shadow. You linger, imagining the tension of those nights. Fires kept small, songs sung low, children hushed with stories of watchful ancestors. Did they believe they would one day win back independence? Did they know they were carving a legacy of defiance that outlasted them? Historians still argue whether resistance was coordinated under leaders or simply scattered acts of stubborn courage. Either way, the mist remembers. The trail bends upward again, and with it rises a sense of inevitability. Resistance can burn hot, but empires press hard. Ahead waits the sound of new horns, not Inca this time, but strangers with iron and horses, and the clouds shiver with the weight of conquest yet to come. You climb from the hush of the rebel terraces toward a pass where the clouds thin, and the first new sound you hear isn't birds or water, but iron striking iron. Hooves drum on the path, unfamiliar and heavy, followed by voices shaped by a language that rolls its R's like pebbles down a riverbed. You step aside as figures appear through the vapor, men wrapped in metal, gloved hands gripping long lances, riding animals taller and faster than any llama you've ever seen. For a heartbeat, you think rider and beast are one creature, living thunder with a shining crest. Then the line breaks, and you exhale, because even thunder has seams. They carry banners with crosses and the scent of smoke and salt. Sea on their clothes, campfire in their hair. Behind them tramp Andean auxiliaries from far provinces, and behind those, porters with packs and a priest who keeps his hat on in the drizzle like a stubborn umbrella. You feel the earth quiver under hooves as they pass. One accepted fact settles into place like a stone in a wall. In the early 1530s, Spaniards moved into these highlands amid their lightning strike campaign against the Inca, and the balance of power across the Andes changed almost overnight. News travels fast on imperial roads, and fear travels faster. In this ridge-bound world, word spreads that some cloud forest leaders approach the strangers with offerings, coca leaves, woven cloth, peace tokens, and warnings about the Inca garrisons that still tighten the valleys. Others melt into the leaf shadows, watching. You can almost feel the weighing of options. Ally with new thunder to punish the old sun, or hold back and see which storm passes first. A neutral voice drifts through the mist. Many Chachapoya groups initially aided the Spaniards as auxiliaries against Inca forces, hoping to loosen imperial bonds that had tightened over decades. Some guides led Spanish columns along knife-edge paths that only locals understood. Some fighters joined skirmishes that rolled like fog through ravines. Yet alliance is a rope with knots you don't notice until it tightens. After the Inca state crumples around its capitals, a different net drops. Tribute owed not to Cusco, but to encomenderos. Villages reorganized, bells hung in new chapels, the calendar told to turn to a different rhythm. The priest lifts his hand, murmurs blessings, and your ear catches one detail. Place names pronounced with careful unfamiliarity, as if the syllables themselves must be converted. You watch the metal hats glint and have a small, sleepy thought you don't say out loud. Those helmets would make efficient soup pots in a pinch. Practical, but probably not in the inventory manual. Epidemics move like wind through keyholes. Fevers arrive in waves, some likely earlier via trade routes, others borne by newcomers, taking grandparents, children, leaders, storytellers. You keep to YouTube's safe gentleness. Homes go silent, terraces rest untended, paths grow less certain underfoot. In these forests, grief walks at human pace, carrying names in a whisper. Historians still argue whether disease struck some valleys before face-to-face encounters or only after. A grim debate of timing measured in seasons and funerals. What doesn't need debate is the result. Communities thin, and memory has to carry more weight than it was ever meant to. On another ridge, the new thunder reorganizes the map. Settlements shift toward mission sites. Messengers carry papers stamped with names that aren't local. A magistrate dictates. A scribe scratches ink into fibers. You hear that scribe at work. The nib whispers like a mosquito in a library. Want a very human moment? One soldier tries coca leaves to impress allies, chews too much, and spends an hour staring at moss like it's a masterpiece. Cross-cultural learning has its awkward chapters, a quirky tidbit filed under legends that stick to fog. Some guides claim that on the first encounters, a few villagers thought horse and rider formed a single animal spirit, at least until dismounting ruined the magic. Similar tales echo all over the Americas. Whether it happened here or later, storytellers stitched it into a good yarn no one can nail down. It survives because it explains the shock cleanly. Everything you know about movement and power rewrites itself in one clanging afternoon. From the neutral narrator again. By the 1570s, colonial policies of reduction gather scattered hamlets into nucleated towns under church towers, standardize tribute, and route labor toward mines and estates. In theory, order. In practice, families uprooted, seasonal rhythms bent, and old cemeteries left staring from their cliffs at empty paths. Some Chachapoya lineages hold office in the new towns. Others resist, stall, or vanish into back valleys that maps call unsettled, because the cartographers didn't ask the mountain's opinion. You stand with a group of elders as they meet a Spanish official beside a chapel whose walls smell of wet plaster. Woven belts exchange hands. A list of names is read. The official smiles with many teeth and fewer answers. You notice how the locals keep their staffs planted in the earth, a subtle declaration that roots still matter. Politics here becomes a choreography of bows and bargains, of signatures that wobble like uncertain bridges. The most dangerous thing on this ridge isn't a spear, it's paperwork. Even within the new order, the fog protects spaces no bell can reach. At night, some families climb to cliff shrines, placing small offerings the priest wouldn't approve of. Flowers, a wisp of maize beer, a whisper to grandparents who understood these ridges before thunder learned them. Syncretism, the scholars call it. You might call it remembering to breathe with two lungs at once. Historians still argue whether the cloud forest rites folded gently into Christian practices or endured in quiet defiance, masked by candles and Latin echoes. Perhaps both. Faith has always known how to braid strands without breaking them. The soldiers move on, as soldiers do. A column of porters follows, then the slow caravan of administration, which travels at the speed of stamped wax. Somewhere, a young Chachapoya man signs on as an auxiliary for a distant expedition, because coin buys salt and cloth. Somewhere else, A woman weaves a pattern older than the empire that fell and the one that rose, her shuttle ticking like a patient heart. You catch yourself smiling at a small mercy. Even empires can't schedule the clouds. When fog decides to drop a curtain, every plan waits. Consider it nature's buffering symbol. On a high overlook you pause, looking back toward Quelap's silhouette submerged in green. You don't name it out loud, because names are how strangers claim things. But you greet it, the way you greet a house you once lived in, by brushing the door frame with your fingertips. Below, new roads thread the slopes, but the old footpaths remain, faint as veins under skin. You think of the Puranmachus standing watch, the street of tombs at Revache, the terraces that cling like determination. Conquest carries weight, but stone remembers purpose. As the day dims, a tale drifts up from a market fire. Spaniards marveling at cloud forest people with unusually light complexions, turning observation into rumor, rumor into legend. You've heard this tune before, somewhere back near the trailhead where mist first found your shoulders. The story will loop and tangle, loved by some, doubted by others, sharpened into myth by a century that enjoyed writing about curiosities. And just over the next ridge, close enough to taste the damp on the air, wait those very legends, ready to be tested against stone, paint, and memory. You walk along the ridge where the last echoes of horses fade, and the mist leans closer, carrying whispers of rumor rather than hoofbeats. In the smoke of new fires and the silence of abandoned terraces, one tale keeps resurfacing, stubborn as moss on stone. The cloud people, some say, were different. Pale-skinned, lighter-haired, taller than their neighbors. It's the kind of story that makes ears perk up, whether whispered in a tavern centuries ago or repeated in guidebooks today. One accepted fact: Spanish chroniclers such as Pedro Chiesa de Leon and Garcilaso de la Vega described Chachapoya people as fairer in complexion compared to other Andean groups. Some accounts even mention beautiful women taken as wives by Inca nobility, a detail recorded often enough that it lodged in the historical imagination. Whether exaggeration or careful observation, those descriptions stuck, turning into a legend that refuses to dissolve even when mist hides the ruins. You pause at a clearing where sunlight manages to slice through, landing on a carved wall. You imagine Spaniards standing here, quills scratching notes while marveling at the people they encountered. For them, light skin became a curiosity worth recording, and for centuries since, the label "warriors of unusual appearance" has followed the Chachapoya. Historians still argue whether this was genetic variation within the Andes, a reflection of centuries of interregional mixing, or simply biased eyes interpreting features through European lenses. The debate runs in circles, like clouds that keep drifting back over the same ridge. A quirky tidbit. In the 19th century, some explorers spun the story further, suggesting the Chachapoya were descendants of shipwrecked Europeans who somehow made it across the Atlantic long before Columbus. A few even pointed to Norse wanderers or mythical Phoenician sailors. The theories had little evidence, but they flourished because the idea of lost white tribes tickled Victorian imaginations. Today, archaeologists shake their heads, sip their coffee, and mutter, "Here we go again." Still, the image of ghostly, pale warriors haunting the cloud forest makes for irresistible fireside tales. You walk deeper into the woods, and the story complicates itself. In front of you stands a group of locals telling visitors the old legends. One man points toward the cliffs and says, "Our grandparents said the Chachapoya looked different. That's why they stood out." Another woman shrugs and adds, "Or maybe the Spaniards saw what they wanted to see." The mist curls between them, impartial. Neutral voice breaks in. Modern DNA studies are still limited, but suggest Chachapoya ancestry is firmly indigenous, tied to Andean and Amazonian lineages rather than far-flung outsiders. What makes the story persist may not be genetics at all, but identity, a way for descendants and outsiders alike to mark the Chachapoya as unique among Andean peoples. In that sense, the legend serves as cultural armor, a mythic banner that waves even after fortresses fall. You picture the scene. Inca generals frustrated by ambushes, Spanish scribes spinning tales of unusual warriors, modern tourists wide-eyed at the thought of cloud Vikings. Through it all, the Chachapoya themselves remain. Not myths, not Europeans in disguise, but mountain people who lived, fought, and built in a landscape few others could endure. The mist doesn't care what color your hair is. It clings equally to everyone. And yet, part of you enjoys the humor in it. Imagine a Chachapoya warrior overhearing these future debates. Descended from Norsemen, from Phoenicians? Seriously? We're just tired of farming sideways on mountains. Give us a break. You laugh softly, the kind of chuckle that carries both amusement and exasperation. The path curves upward, and as you climb, the air grows wetter, cooler. The myths of pale-skinned warriors fade behind you, replaced by another kind of persistence. Not stories told by outsiders, but stones and walls stubbornly clinging to ridges, waiting for the jungle to cover them, then for explorers to uncover them again. Ahead lies silence, reclaimed by vines, where ruins whisper more honestly than legends ever could. The forest thickens as you climb, vines looping across the trail like ropes left behind by someone who never came back to fetch them. The mist swells and thins, unveiling shapes that look like walls until you blink and realize, yes, they are walls. Ruins rise out of the undergrowth, their stones softened by moss, their edges blurred by centuries of rain. The cloud people may be long gone, but their cities are still here, hidden under green blankets, half asleep yet refusing to vanish. One accepted fact: after the fall of the Inca and the arrival of Spaniards, many Chachapoya settlements were abandoned. Cuelap, once bustling, slowly emptied, its stones left to the vines and orchids. For centuries, jungle roots gripped tighter than any chain, reclaiming what humans built. It is this natural camouflage that kept so many ruins intact, waiting until explorers and archaeologists stumbled across them again in the 19th and 20th centuries. You wander into the remains of a village. Round stone bases of houses cluster together like coins scattered on the ground. Their roofs of thatch are long gone, but the circular patterns are clear. The air smells of wet leaves and old stone. You crouch to touch a wall, cold, damp, yet sturdy. Even after centuries of storms, the mortarless stones cling to each other like old friends, refusing to let go. It feels almost alive here. Orchids bloom from cracks, bromeliads spill over walls, and trees rise through the very heart of former plazas. The jungle didn't destroy Chachapoya architecture. It adopted it. Every ruin is a cohabitation, stone and vine sharing the same address. If you look at it with a tired traveler's humor, you might say the cloud people invented the first green building movement. Neutral voice steps in. Archaeologists have identified hundreds of Chachapoya sites across northern Peru, many still unexplored. Cuelap remains the most famous, but sites like Gran Pajaten and Los Pinchudos add to the mosaic. Each ruin tells a slightly different story: fortress, village, ceremonial center. What they share are circular dwellings, friezes of zigzag or diamond patterns, and cliffside burials that make the landscape itself a graveyard of stone. You pause at the edge of a cliff where a wall juts out over the valley. From here, you see nothing but waves of mist rolling across ridges. The wall feels like a balcony for spirits, as though someone long ago built it just to step out and greet the clouds. You imagine a Chachapoya elder standing there, staff in hand, whispering a prayer before turning back inside. The wall still holds that gesture, frozen in stone. A quirky tidbit: some explorers in the 19th century, finding these overgrown ruins, convinced themselves they were looking at lost cities of Europeans because the architecture felt so alien compared to Inca sites. It was another echo of the pale warrior myth, ruins that couldn't possibly be native. Of course, archaeology later proved otherwise, but the image of mysterious builders from elsewhere clung stubbornly to these stones. Even now, you half expect someone in a fedora to swing in with a whip, humming the Indiana Jones theme. You walk deeper, ducking under a branch, and the silence thickens. The ruins don't feel abandoned so much as paused. A bird darts out from a hollow wall, scolding you with sharp chirps before vanishing into the leaves. You grin. Apparently, even the birds think you're trespassing. Somewhere, a monkey hoots, and the sound bounces between walls, like the jungle itself remembers laughter. Historians still argue whether sites like Cuelap and Gran Pajaten served primarily as fortresses, religious centers, or both. To you, standing in the damp quiet, the categories blur. Walls can defend, but they can also enclose. Communities frame rituals, or simply mark the stubbornness of a people who insisted on shaping stone even when the mountain resisted. You step into what might have been a plaza. It's carpeted with moss now, but once children probably ran across it, dogs barked, guinea pigs squeaked, and elders gathered by fires. You imagine a festival night here, drums pounding, flutes spiraling into mist, torches flaring against walls now dark with moss. Then the jungle closed in, and the music stopped, leaving only stone and silence. The sun breaks through for a fleeting moment, a golden shaft spilling across a wall etched with faint zigzags. It's as if the pattern glows for an instant before vanishing back into shadow. You realize this is how memory works in the Andes. Not constant, but flashing like lightning in fog. Brief glimpses, sudden clarity, then obscurity again. You walk on, feeling the weight of silence. Ahead, you know, others will come. Explorers, archaeologists, treasure seekers, each peeling back the jungle's grip in search of meaning. For now, though, the ruins belong to moss, to orchids, and to the patient clouds. Vines brush your shoulders as you follow a faint mule track and hear a new rhythm in the forest. Tap, tap, tap. Metal on stone, careful and patient. The green curtain parts, and you step into a field camp. Tarps stretched between trees, screens to keep out insects with unrealistic optimism, buckets labeled with neat handwriting, and a line of trowels laid out like silverware at a very nerdy dinner. A soft voice asks you to watch your step, because in this place, even footprints count. The ruins you wandered in silence now host a different music. The scratch of brushes, the thud of notebooks closing, the rustle of tissue used to cradle a fragile shard. The jungle has been turning pages alone for centuries. Suddenly, readers have returned. You crouch near a wall where a conservator's gloved hands coax a zigzag frieze from moss. Each stroke reveals another notch, a pattern you've seen before in the cloud country language of stone. You want to cheer, but field rules prefer quiet to applause. Instead, you whisper a joke to yourself about archaeology being slow-motion treasure hunting. Then decide that in this humidity, nothing moves slowly except your sense of dignity. Someone offers coffee brewed to the strength of motor oil. You accept. It tastes like boiled rainforest and heroism. A neutral voice steps in. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, travelers, local farmers, and scholars rediscovered sites that communities nearby had long known. Kuelap's terraces under Green, the painted cliff tombs at Revache, the anthropomorphic sarcophagi at Karagia. One accepted fact anchors the recent past. In the mid-1990s, looting at Laguna de los Condores, the Lake of the Condors, led to a major salvage effort, and archaeologists recovered more than 200 mummies and thousands of artifacts spanning late Chachapoya and Inca times. Many are now conserved at the Museo Lemebamba, where careful climate control stands in for the cool breath of caves. The Cloud People's faces, long hidden, met modern eyes again, sunken, still, and startlingly present. You picture that lake site, a cliffside necropolis mirrored in black water, bundles seated in rows as if attending an endless lesson on patience. The rescue teams climb with ropes, cradle groups of bones and textiles as though carrying sleeping children, and descend to boats that move across water slick as obsidian. We keep it gentle. There is no spectacle here, only care. Paper tags bloom among the bundles like white leaves. In a small tent by the shore, someone traces a weaving pattern with a pencil, and the line shivers when a gust presses at the canvas wall. There's a quirky tidbit guides sometimes share with a grin. Early visitors to Karagia swore the painted eyes on the sarcophagi followed them along the ledge, like a museum guard with opinions. Lighting and nerves explain it, but the story persists because the sensation is real. Those long noses, those shaded sockets, seem calibrated to notice trespass. Another curiosity clings to the same cliffs. Tales that the ledges were reached using ladders that were deliberately destroyed afterward. A one-way staircase to the sky. You look up at those distant faces and think, yes, that feels exactly right. The camp shifts to a cliff sector. You watch climbers haul a padded crate along a traverse no wider than your boot sole. They move like letters written by a steady hand, each step a stroke, each breath a comma. A drone buzzes out from the tarp's shadow, modern wings replacing the old ladder, and returns with images of niches too narrow for human shoulders. The screen blooms with red and cream traces. Someone murmurs a location code. Someone else marks a grid on transparent film. Fieldwork is a choreography of caution. Even the jokes come softly. One technician claims their sunscreen doubles as artifact glue, then immediately swears they're kidding. Between tasks, the team talks origins, meanings, and timelines, while moths turn their headlamps into tiny galaxies. Historians still argue whether the tall, human-shaped sarcophagi held single elites or symbolized lineages, individual guardians versus family sentinels, and whether cliff mausoleums like Rivash were neighborhood shrines, political displays, or both. They also wrestle with the question of sequence at sites like Laguna de los Condores. Which burials came first, how Chachapoya practices braided with Inca ones, and why some chambers were sealed so carefully you'd think silence itself was being preserved. Neutral voice again. Excavation here is never just science. It is diplomacy. Permissions from communities and the state, agreements about study and return, discussions about what should remain in situ and what must be moved for conservation. The Le Mbamba Museum stands not as a trophy hall but as a climate-controlled compromise, a place where textiles, so easily devoured by the forest, can keep telling their stories without dissolving back into thread and soil. Teams photograph, draw, 3D scan, and then pack with patience you could stack stones upon. You drift to a table where a textile specialist hovers over a cloth the color of old sunsets. Geometric bands stride across it, diamonds, steps, lines like walking songs. You're told the pattern may encode identity or status, or maybe it's simply beautiful because someone wanted it that way. Either answer feels like respect. A tiny pin of copper rests beside the cloth, greened with time, while a bead of spondylus, ocean shell far from its sea, glints orange against all this green country. Trade routes once threaded through these mists like spider silk. Even now, the bead seems to hum with distance. A field notebook lies open. The entry is wonderfully human. Ropes dry slowly. So do socks, morale restored by soup. You imagine future historians analyzing the soup line as evidence of resilience. Your own socks feel like amphibians, and you take one discreet step into a patch of sunlight, pretending to study lichen while actually conducting a small solar experiment on your toes. As evening leans in, the team carries crates to a storage tent, each box cushioned with foam and labeled left, right, up, down with more arrows than a veteran archer. Someone cracks a joke about the camp's unofficial mascot, a moth the size of a sandwich, then jumps when it lands on their hat. Laughter falls easy now. The day's concentration has been gentled into quiet pride. You catch yourself smiling at how calm everything feels. Finding is exciting, but saving, that's the art. You walk a little beyond the tarps to where the forest takes over again. Between two trees, a thin path drops toward a balcony of rock. Out there, wind rakes the leaves, and a thunderhead muscles past the far ridge. You think of the stunned faces unveiled at Le Mbamba, of cliff guardians painted to watch forever, of villagers who always knew the ledges were there, even when maps forgot. The work of rediscovery, you realize, wasn't a single eureka. It was a long conversation in many languages, Quechua and Spanish, and the scratch of pencil, rope creak and waterfall breath, and the nearly inaudible voice of woven cotton. The cloud forest listened, and, when asked carefully, answered. On your way back through camp, a student glances up from a bone the size of a slim flute and asks if you need a headlamp. You shake your head and lift your chin to the sky. The clouds, surprisingly generous, thin to a pearly wash, and a few early stars blink awake like patient witnesses. Somewhere uphill, a guardian on a ledge stares the same direction. If stone had eyelids, you suspect, it would refuse to blink, and the grand puzzle remains, bigger than any one trench, how all these pieces, Fortresses in fog, house tombs on ledges, bundles by a cold lake, fit into a life lived day by day. Historians still argue whether the center of gravity was defense, ritual, or the practical art of farming sideways. You decide it was all of them, because any place this steep asks for multiple talents: bravery for the cliffs, reverence for the mists, and a sense of humor for the socks. Night gathers. The tarps glow like lampshades for giants. The forest hums and murmurs and edits your thoughts into calmer lines. Tomorrow the brushes will begin again, and another eyelash of paint will look new under a microscope. For now, you leave the camp to its careful sleeping and follow the path toward the next ridge, where questions collect like dew and mysteries come into focus for a heartbeat before the mist folds them away again. The trail winds upward again, and the sound of the camp fades into the background hum of insects and dripping leaves. The jungle presses close, but your thoughts drift beyond the vines and moss into the realm of questions. You've walked among fortresses, tombs, plazas, and museums, yet what lingers most are not the answers, but the uncertainties. The Chachapoya story is less a finished book and more a foggy manuscript, with pages missing and sentences smudged. One accepted fact: the Chachapoya were absorbed into the Inca Empire before the Spanish arrived, resisting fiercely, yet eventually pulled into the imperial web. Their lands stretched across Peru's cloud forests, and their architecture, textiles, and funerary practices remain distinct from their neighbors. Beyond that, the edges blur. Were they a unified people, or a loose collection of allied groups? Did Cuelap serve primarily as fortress, temple, or both? The mainstream record gives us the skeleton, but flesh and breath are harder to recover. You lean against a stone, listening to the wind swirl through branches. Historians still argue whether the Chachapoya's cultural identity survived conquest intact or dissolved into imperial frameworks. Did the people themselves continue calling one another cloud warriors? Or is that title only an echo, placed on them by outsiders? You realize much of what we know is shaped through the lenses of others. Inca chroniclers, Spanish scribes, Victorian explorers, and modern archaeologists, all carrying their own expectations. It's like hearing a song through several walls. You catch the rhythm, but the lyrics slip away. A quirky tidbit floats up. In the mid-20th century, a few adventurers speculated that the Chachapoya might be connected to faraway Celts or even Egyptians, based solely on the round houses at Cuelap and decorative patterns. The theory didn't survive scrutiny, but it made for sensational headlines. You can't help but chuckle. Apparently, every ruin in the world is somebody's lost cousin of Atlantis. It's a reminder that human imagination sometimes fills the mist faster than evidence can. Neutral narration returns. What makes the Chachapoya compelling is not just their mystery, but the way their story keeps inviting new interpretations. DNA analysis hints at deep indigenous roots, textile studies reveal intricate artistry, and radiocarbon dates sketch timelines. Yet even with technology, many puzzles remain unsolved. For every question answered, two more sprout like orchids from stone. That's the paradox of archaeology. The closer you look, the more mysterious the past becomes. You step into a clearing where moss has covered the last outline of a circular house. It feels like the perfect metaphor. Patterns clear enough to recognize, blurred enough to confuse. Was this home a weaver's workshop, a warrior's hearth, a child's playground? Without voices, the walls stay silent. You smile wryly. If walls could talk, archaeologists would be out of a job, and half of history. YouTube would lose its content. The mist curls tighter around you, and you sense the weight of time pressing in. Yet the lack of certainty doesn't frustrate. It soothes. Mystery has its own calm. The Chachapoya don't need to be pinned down like specimens. Their presence lingers in the in-between, between earth and sky, known and unknown, remembered and forgotten. As you prepare to move on, you notice a flash of humor in your own thoughts. Imagine a Chachapoya elder hearing all these modern debates, origins, skin color, fortress functions. He'd probably shrug, sip maize beer, and say, "We lived, we built, we fought, we loved. Isn't that enough?" And maybe it is. The trail bends once more, pulling you toward the last great pause of this journey. Ahead waits the moment where memory, ruins, and mist all converge. Not to deliver certainty, but to remind you that remembrance itself is enough to keep the cloud people alive. The trail crests one final ridge, and for the first time in this long journey, the mist opens completely. You stand on a balcony of stone, and the view is a sea of ridges rolling into the horizon, each wrapped in pale clouds that drift like restless spirits. Below you, valleys darken into dusk, rivers glint like threads of silver, and above, the last light of day turns the sky into fading gold. It feels less like arriving at an ending, and more like stepping into the heart of everything you've seen. Fortresses, tombs, markets, ceremonies, rebellions, legends. All of it breathes together in this panorama, a tapestry stretched between mountains. The ruins nearby are quiet but stubborn. A circle of walls leans out over the drop, their stones worn yet still locked in place. A zigzag frieze, faint under moss, glimmers when the sunset strikes it. You sit on the edge, your legs dangling, and imagine generations doing the same. Families talking by firelight, warriors sharpening spears, children asking about the guardians on the cliffs. One accepted fact comes steady as stone. The Chachapoya were masters of living where most would never dare, making home not just in cloud forests, but in their very mist, halfway between sky and earth. And yet, their story is unfinished. Historians still argue whether the Chachapoya were ever fully conquered, or if their identity simply shifted under the layers of empire. Did they disappear into the Inca and Spanish systems? Or do their descendants still walk these valleys, carrying threads of culture hidden in songs, in textiles, in quiet rituals at night? The mist does not answer. It only curls, patient and vague, like history itself. You lean back on your hands, watching a condor circle high above. For a heartbeat, it seems the bird isn't flying, but simply suspended, held up by the breath of the mountains. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some guides tell visitors that the condor is the only creature that can deliver messages from the living to the dead, ferrying words upward through the cloud canopy. Whether that's true or just poetic, you can't help but whisper a greeting to those who built walls and carved tombs before you, hoping the bird carries it on. The ruins grow quiet as night deepens. A star flickers through the thinning clouds, then another, until the whole sky seems to open at once. You exhale slowly, and for the first time in the journey, you don't feel like you're walking through someone else's past. You feel like you're sitting inside it, as though the Chachapoya are not gone, but simply mist-shrouded, still waiting on their ridges, still guarding their cliffs. And as you let your eyes close, you understand. Remembrance is resistance. Memory is survival. And the cloud people remain as long as the fog refuses to lift completely. The air grows softer now, the edges of stone blurring as evening folds over the mountains. You let your breath slow, matching the rhythm of drifting clouds. Each exhale is long, easy, carrying away the tension of battles, arguments, and unanswered questions. What remains is quiet, the hush of moss under your fingers, the weight of history leaning gently against your shoulder, the patient companionship of stone that has seen centuries come and go. The panorama outside your eyes lingers even after you close them, mist curling like silver scarves, stars beginning to glow above the ridges, ruins holding their outlines in twilight. It is not silence exactly, but a kind of soft music, water dripping from leaves, a distant bird calling once and then resting, the breeze whispering against the cliffs. Everything slows together, like the whole world taking a deep breath before sleep. You imagine the guardians on their ledges, still watching, not stern but calm now, keeping their quiet vigil. You imagine the plazas of Cuelap filled not with shouts of war, but with laughter, with songs fading gently into night. And you imagine yourself walking once more through the village circles, pausing at doorways that are no longer ruins, but homes, warm with firelight and comfort. There is nothing to solve tonight, no mysteries to untangle, no empires to confront. Just the reassurance that life has always flowed in patterns, building, fading, returning, remembered. You are part of that pattern too, simply another figure breathing in the cloud forest, another listener carried by mist. Let the weight of time soften into rest. Let the ridges and rivers carry your thoughts away. Sleep comes easily here, in the company of mountains and memory. The end, sweet dreams.